any stragglers coming in, then that'll be great. We can continue on with that. I want to thank everyone for coming. This is our 5th workshop of the Rainbow Ridge Forest Stewardship Workshop Series, where we're bringing in various experts from within and outside of Siskiyou County to talk about forestry issues and help educate us a little bit more when it comes to managing our own land. So today we have 4 different presenters, so we're mixing things up a little bit. In addition to myself, I will be doing a presentation on a private landowner's experience. We have with us the U.S. Forest Service at Shasta T, Trinity, Nisha Van Hees, we have Sierra Pacific Industries, Wheeler Birdwell, and we have Siskiyou County, the Department of General Services, Randy County here. In no particular order, I'm just going to give a quick little bio of them, and then I'll let them do their thing. Randy Akana is here to present the work the county did on the land surrounding Lake Siskiyou. Mr. Akana oversees the flood control district, the power authority, communications, stage, airports, courthouse, and ground maintenance and solid waste. He manages over 2,000 acres at Lake Siskiyou under the flood control district, most of which is forest. He has a BS in engineering from Chico State and has been working with the county for 12 years. Nisha Van Hees with the U.S. Forest Service will be presenting on Deer Creek treatments on the Forest Service land along Rainbow Ridge. Ms. Van Hees works as the program manager for the Timber Stand Improvement, which is a subdivision of silviculture. The Timber Stand Improvement and Fuels work together to meet integrated vegetation treatment goals via pre-commercial thinning, release, understory hazardous fuels, vegetation control, fuel break construction, and pruning. And most of the Timber Stand Improvement is established plantations which range from 5 to 80 years along roads and in strategic locations. Wheeler Birdwell is a registered professional forester for Sierra Pacific Industries. He's responsible for the Redding District, of which the 424 acres of Sierra Pacific land on Rainbow Ridge is a part of. This is the largest district from Sierra Pacific Industries, and he's been with Sierra Pacific for 34 years. The private landowner in question is Katie Jessup. She couldn't be here today due to a family emergency, but I'll be presenting on her behalf. Katie and her family, the Jessups, have been living on the land for almost 50 years on Rainbow Ridge. They own over 100 acres, and they have a non-industrial timber management plan, which I'll get into a little later about what that means. Katie Jessup is the co-owner of Spring Hill Nursery, and she's a resident of Mount Shasta. So we're going to start off with the county. So I'd like to welcome Randy Akana up. Thanks.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here and talk to you a little bit about Lake Siskiyou and what's going on at Lake Siskiyou as far as the county goes. So we'll go ahead and get started. Lake Siskiyou is under the Siskiyou County Flood Control and Water Conservation District.
Just the arrows.
Okay. In 2005, the county initiated and signed a NTMP, which is the Non-Industrial Timber Management Plan, to oversee the Lake Siskiyou area. As Kara said, that particular area is just right around 2,000 acres. There's about 1,545 acres change that's actually forest land. The rest, of course, is the lake. The goal of this NTMP from our standpoint is to manage and establish a well-stocked stand of trees and vegetation, classes of permit harvest of individuals or small groups of trees to realize renewal and continually establish a crop in that area. So we're not out there for the money, I guess is what we're saying. We're out there to basically help the health of that forest and enhance it in this next 100 years. Some more of our objectives, of course, in this first 30 years, our targets are dead, diseased, and damaged trees. We're going to be establishing, the best that we can, an uneven age structure of trees, in other words, young trees, medium trees, older trees. We're going to really focus on some of our hardwood areas we have, especially on Castle Lake Road. We have a hardwood black oak stand there. We're going to make sure that the conifers don't start encroaching on that, so we'll be focusing on that as part of it. And inside the campground, we're really trying to maintain number one is a defensible fire break. We're also focusing on seed retention and basal area because right now it's not adequate. So we're trying to see what we might need to do in there. We're focusing on planting a variety of species of trees. And of course, maintaining public safety with hazard trees, because with the population of the people in that area, we want to make sure that it's safe. And I have a question. Go ahead, Nick.
What is a basal area?
Basal, that is actually, it's a formula that calculates the area of the ground versus the base of the trees proportional to that ground. And foresters might be able to give a better example of that, but that's the best way. I'm not a forester, so.
Well, if you cut out a tree cookie, you know, and that area inside that tree cookie is basal area.
Tree cookie?
Well,
Just a slab.
if you look at it, you cut off a tree and look at the stump, the area of that face, that circle, is basal area. And it's, we think in those terms quite a bit in terms of stocking. For us, in other words, if you said something like there's 300 basal area out there, that's a lot of trees. If there's only 100, that's pretty open. So I give you an idea. It's just a measure of stocking.
When you say 300, is that 30% of the land area is trees?
Oh, 100 trees?
You know, you said, what do those numbers mean?
Oh, if I said like 100, I said 100 square feet of basal area is a pretty open, widely spaced, just off the top of my head, trees spaced at 30, 40 feet apart.
Okay.
You know, whereas you're more like 300, as I'm taking on top of it, 300 plus basal area, you might be 15 feet apart. Does that give you a visual kind of?
Okay.
It's the proportional, as I understand it, the trees versus the area that the trees are on.
Well, you might, yeah.
To some degree.
I may stand correctly. Go on, Randy.
All right, we'll keep moving on. So what do we do? Well, we go in and we rehab the forest. We have had an opportunity to take a look at some of our overstocked areas where we're starting to see some diseased trees in those areas. And we've brought in some equipment to mitigate that. We come in and selectively mark all the trees as they typically do in just a timber harvest plan. But we're focusing more on the health of the tree rather than the production of the wood that's coming out of the forest. We do produce logs that come out of the forest. So those logs go to the mills that bid the highest on whatever type of wood that they would like to see. So in other words, the different lumber companies come in and they take a look at the species of the timber that's in there and the size of the timber, and then they bid on that. Whichever the highest bidder is, that's who gets the contract for the county. We also biomass everything, so all the tops and debris that's left over from the processing of the lumber, or excuse me, the timber on the property goes into a biomass machine or a chipper, and then it's sold to either a fuel burner or a boiler user that's using the fuel for boiler purposes. And that's sort of what it looks like afterwards. That's a before shot on the left, and that's an after shot on the right. And there's not really a lot of difference. You know, I think in many cases, if it was a different situation, they may go in and thin out a little more. But you have a real good example. This is right off Castle Lake Road, just down from the Castle Lake parking lot on the right-hand side. And that was the second process we did. That was the second logging operation we did in there. So you get an idea of what we do. Oh, we also are very in tune to to fire breaks. As you see in the pink sort of reddish areas, those are the roads that surround Lake Siskiyou and our property. There's about 25, 30 miles of these roads that we go in, and 150 feet off the edge of the road, we cut back and reduce the fuels in that area to hopefully prevent a fuel or a fire from sparking and taking off into the forest. And here are some of the things that has to happen. Of course, our funding sources are always a challenge. How do we pay for all this? Well, we typically have two funding sources. In the past, we've had Fire Safe Council. They've been really good working with us in granting monies to help us with fuel reduction in those areas. We also use the revenue from the timber that we get. If we make any money on the timber process or the logging process, and that comes out of the flood control district. And those are the two revenue mechanisms. The manners in which we treat these areas, we use hand crews, which are typically the Deadwood Conservation Corps. We use those. We're one of their largest sponsors. We use some mechanical usage. We use rototillers and tractors. And then we have some alternatives that we'll talk about. The biggest challenge is the ongoing maintenance. Because of the sheer volume of what we're dealing with, it seems like as soon as we get done making a pass through the roads, it's starting over again. So it's really a challenge to keep the money flow, to be able to have enough crews and resources to keep that fuel down. Because of course, once you start to open the canopies, when you come in with a logging process, it really allows the vegetation on the ground to take off. So we're in there trying to deal with that. Here's some of our crews working along the side of the road. I believe this is on WA Bar Road, just down past the campground. They're down there just chipping wood. We take it, we do burn some of it, but as much as we can, we chip it and put it back on to the sides of the road. And again, from the edge of the road, 150 feet, if you're driving in that area, you can look back and see some of the areas that we've been treating. This is a rototiller project we did. We did about 4 acres down by Red Hill Road. If you're familiar with that area, it's just past the campground, about a mile on the right. We brought a rototiller in after it was treated with a hand crew. There's a lot of different species of vegetation, and our biggest and most aggressive that we seem to have in there is chickapin. And that darn stuff just continues to thrive once the canopy's been opened up. And this particular area has been logged, so you can see the openness. So we brought this rototiller in, and we were amazed at how much sustainability we maintained after we had that rototiller in there. It really chopped up all the roots and things and took the majority of the vegetation that was there and put it to rest. And we really were able to sustain that type of a fuel rate for about 3, almost 4 years. About 2 years ago, we brought in some goats, about 750 goats we brought into that same area down, getting close. This is almost right on the border of Shasta T and the flood control district on WA Brown Road. We brought these goats in, and we treated approximately 25 to 30 acres, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but it was right around there. It was also a Fire Safe Council project that was funded with CAL FIRE. Yeah, CAL FIRE, not CDF anymore. Yes, sir.
Going back to the rototilling, can you just do that on level now, or can you? I'm thinking about erosion. Is there any?
Right. Yeah, we really looked at that. In that particular case, we used level ground in areas that didn't have a lot of steep terrain that we would potentially have erosion, because that can be a problem. Once, of course, you remove the vegetation, that removes the strength out of the soil to hold that vegetation and that soil in there. So we didn't have any problems in that particular area, even with all the snow and everything. I mean, there was some very minor erosion that was close to Red Hill Road, but it wasn't anything that created any problems for us at all. But that is a concern that you'll have to, if you get into that particular area, once you start to get into that rototiller type of mechanical treatment, that you could have erosion on the more steeper areas. So anyway, the goats came in. We learned a lot from the goat project. One of the things we learned is that it's important to bring the goats into the project in the early spring, because we brought them in about summertime. We were having some just logistic issues of bringing the goats in. And as you can see, the goat on the left, he's stretching up there pretty high. The vegetation had been growing for a while, and the little shoots that were coming up out of the ground were just not what he wanted to eat. So they were sort of stripping all these little limbs off, and when they were done, there wasn't many leaves left, but there was a tremendous amount of these little branches just everywhere. So we had to come in with hand crews and treat that area afterwards. So what we learned from this particular project is if we can bring these goats in when the diameter of the stock material is less than 1/4 of an inch, we'll have a lot more success than we may in this particular situation, although there was some good success in some areas. We also do meadow restoration on the North Shore Meadow. We bring in, again, hand crews come in. We do a lot of restoration, try to keep noxious weeds out of there and to plant native vegetation to restore it back to its original state. We have a trail, of course, around the lake. It's about 7 0.2 miles. That helps with the fuel grade. We also use a lot of the timber that we pull off, not a lot, but we use some of the timber that we pull off the property for fencing and barriers and other things on the property. It just comes back and we can use. We also bring in the deadwood crew, the CAL FIRE crew. These are actually captains that come in and train the fall trees. They come into the campground and we selectively pick a lot of the dead trees that are real hazard trees, and they come in and train and learn about how to fall trees in that area. And it's really helpful for us because we get trees down and it helps the people learn. So those are some other mechanisms that we use. Some of the challenges ahead for us that we're always facing is the continued removal of the dead, dying, and damaged trees throughout the forest. We're trying to make sure that our neighbors, SPI, Forest Service is doing the same thing, that we're really watching these diseased trees. We're seeing an increased amount of bug kills in our property. Last year we did a salvage project. We pulled out about 125,000 board feet of dead trees. Some of it was usable for lumber, some of it was just having to be chipped up. So there's a real challenge there. We're trying to remove undesirable and invasive types of trees that are creating problems, especially in the hazards like knob cones. Forest folks, we try to, those are what we call people that like to go into the forest and live. They're really a hazard when it comes to fires sometimes. We've had a couple fires break out just because they have campfires and they leave them unattended. They're also in there. There's a lot of debris, and just the use of it is in a way that is not healthy for the forest. We try to maintain fuel breaks around the property to keep the fire down if there was a fire, yet still trying to maintain a shield in the campground. People don't like to be looking 3 camp spots down and seeing all their neighbors. They like to have this up, but there's this balance we have to try to keep, so that's always a challenge for us. We're also trying to explore unconventional methods of fuel suppression. And again, we're looking at goats. We've looked at possibly herbicide treatments. We have never done any herbicides down in that area, and I don't know if we ever will, but we're just looking at different alternatives to try to cut some of our costs down. And of course, probably one of the biggest things is continued education to the community and the user of the park, and really what we're doing in there. When logging trucks move in, and cats move in, and skidders move in, people get really nervous. And we do our best to try to educate people on what we're trying to do and how we're trying to work to make the forest better. So the crew and I thank you. If you have any more questions, there's my email address. You can email me and let me know if you have anything else you'd like to talk about.
What control burns? You haven't mentioned that. Do any of that at all?
We do very few control burns. The only thing we do is pile burning out there. We have talked about doing a broadcasting burn as an experiment with CAL FIRE, but something's changed within CAL FIRE and they didn't want to take on the liability. So we didn't do it. So we have not done any like broadcasting burn or anything like that. Just simple pile burns from the slash removal.
With your black oak area, do you do burning with that, or do you see that as a maintenance for the black oak regeneration? Or I've heard also that like birds can, when they do have bugs and such in the acorns, this and that, sometimes control burns are pretty helpful to maintaining the black oak.
I'm sorry. He's asking about the black oak section that we have up on Castle Lake. I'm assuming that's the area. We have not done much in that area other than watching for encroachment of conifers. We have had the foresters in there looking at our areas to see if we have anything that is of concern health-wise of that stand. And so far, we haven't. As far as broadcast burning or doing any treatment like that, we have not done anything like that.
Do you have regeneration of black oak? Yeah, seedlings, germination of seedlings?
We do not.
Not going out too much.
We haven't, as far as reestablishing
natural. I mean, if you do like a survey to see if there's natural reproduction going on in there.
We do go down in there on occasion, and it's not a big effort, but we do go down to see if we are getting any type of regrowth in that area. We do have a few problems with a lot of people going in trying to cut a lot of those trees, so most of our effort in the black oak stand, again, is just making sure that we maintain the integrity of the stand that's there. But I think it's a good idea, you know, that we might, down the road, that's something we need to talk to our forester with, is try to see if there is an opportunity to possibly enhance that by growing, you know, having more trees produced in that area, taking some type of seed bank and start to produce more. I don't know, it's a good question.
Sometimes they're highly favored if you don't have, you know, like feral pigs or other issues, like ungulates like them, you know, cows.
Right, right, and we typically don't have those.
So that's good. I'm curious, the last question would be, with your larger trees, what kind of diseases are you seeing? The ones that are diseased, you mentioned.
Well, most of the disease that we're seeing is bark beetle. That's probably one of the largest things that we're seeing. There are some other types, and I probably don't know exactly what they are. Maybe Wheeler would have some examples of, because he's right next to us on what they're experiencing. But most of the stuff that we're seeing is bark beetles are killing one of the trees.
Are those when you say normally healthy trees, are they shaded out trees or trees that just are generally weak, are usually the ones attacked by the beetles?
Generally, the answer to that question is it's in an overstocked area where the trees aren't healthy. We've had a few years of drought, so they're strained, and the beetle's getting in and it's killing them. At least that's what it looks like we're finding.
Okay, any more questions? All right, we'll move to our next presentation. Thank you very much, Randy. The next presentation, we're going to be hearing from Sierra Pacific. So this is, again, Wheeler Birdwell.
Hi, everybody. Got my notes, I'll try not to look at them. I'm a professional forester, registered professional forester for Sierra Pacific Industries. I've lived and worked in this area for about 34 years. Sierra Pacific Industries is a third-generation privately owned corporation based out of Anderson, California. We've got manufacturing facilities scattered throughout Northern California and also a substantial amount of timberland around Northern California. We've divided up our forestry land into districts, and I work for what's called the Redding District, the largest forestry district. We manage our land on a sustained yield basis, which means we essentially do not cut more than we grow. We have a 100-year sustained yield plan on file with the state. We're also part of a forestry certification program called Sustained Forestry Initiative, SFI. At any rate, I was chosen. We are governed, anytime you do commercial harvest or timber management on private land, we're subject to forest practice rules. In California, they've been in place since 1973. And they're probably, regarded among many people, as probably the most strictest forestry laws in the world. And I've been asked to, in order to do timber harvest, you have to prepare what's called a timber harvest plan, which is pretty much an environmental impact report. It's fairly extensive, where you have to address the various resource values, not only how you're going to go out there, what trees you're going to cut, but how you're going to cut them, how you're going to log it, if you're going to build roads, what kind of water courses you have out there, how are you going to protect them, if the ground's steep, how you're going to, there's laws that kick in about how you're going to log or build roads or whatnot. Pretty involved. We have to do a cumulative impacts analysis. We have to survey for spotted owls, archaeology surveys, botany surveys, just to mention a few things we have to deal with. When I started my career, these things were like 10, 12 pages, and now they're typically 200 pages. And they probably quadrupled in cost to do them. I mean, if you were to hire someone to do a harvest plan, maybe years ago it was $5,000, you might be paying $20,000 to $30,000 or more. But at any rate, because I'm a member of the community and I'm familiar with the area, I was asked to prepare a timber harvest plan. We don't have any manufacturing facilities in Siskiyou County, but we've got a fair amount of timberland up here. Most of it's out east of Mount Shasta, what we call McLeod Flats. But we've got a couple of unique parcels just on the west side of Interstate 5, and one of which is our Section 19 up on Rainbow Ridge. Rainbow Ridge pretty much bisects the section. It runs through the middle of it, kind of from the northwest to the southeast. And I was asked to do the harvest plan up there because like I said, I'm a local member of the community for a lot of years. Now it had never had a commercial harvest up there, and the only road going through there at that time was a Jeep trail going on the ridge all the way through. And I was in charge of establishing the whole, well, first of all, I guess I'd say, what are our goals here? One of them was establishing a road network to access our land, not just for this harvest plan, but other possible future harvests. Also for possible salvage harvests or access to fight fires. So I laid out all the roads up there and pretty much designed them. We chose selective type harvest for the entire area that we did log. Some of the primary goals we had in mind was to access the land. We wanted to do thinning, thin out the forest. It was really a very, as Randy used the term, overstocked, very dense forest. Some of you couldn't even see through. It was even difficult to walk through in some areas. Pretty overstocked, quite a fire hazard. But our intention was to thin out as much of it as we could, that is, and to reduce the vertical and horizontal fuel loading. And another primary goal was to put a shaded fuel break up on Rainbow Ridge. And then I did the timber harvest plan, and it's pretty extensive. And typically you submit the timber harvest plans to the CAL FIRE. It's also reviewed by Fish and Game, the California Water Quality Control Board. These people are collectively called the review team. Typically you come up with a list of questions or things they want to go out and look at on the ground before your harvest plan is approved. We call it a PHI, pre-harvest inspection. And there's also a public comment period that goes for at least 30 days, and sometimes that's extended. Or anybody can write in and pay a few dollars and get a copy of the plan and comment if you have any concerns. And we had several comments on this plan. Fortunately, we anticipated, I'd say, nearly all the issues that we expected to receive. One of the big things we have to do, also have to do a cumulative impacts analysis, which is done on a watershed level. And one of those factors we have to address in that analysis is visual effects. And we were well aware that that was going to be a very sensitive issue. It's probably one of the primary thing with the type of harvest we're going to do up there. Because if I'm up in our section 19, you're pretty much looking down either in the Lake Siskiyou or Mount Shasta, you can see from my short little PowerPoint. So we want to make it look good. And we did a lot of things that we normally don't do. For example, with our road construction, we normally take all the trees from the top of the cut bank, 4 feet above the cut bank, clear down to the toe bottom of the fill slope. Well, we try to retain as many trees in the fill slope, in other words, work around these trees, to create a screen or trying to hide the rows, which made it more difficult to do. And the slash debris, like the stumps and limbs and whatnot you create from taking the trees out to build the road, we normally place those along the toe of the fill, kind of try to mash it down with the excavator as much as we can, in kind of what we call a windrow. But in this case, we took all the slash and retained it, either watered it up above the road or put it off the side. And when we were all done building the roads, we placed all this slash on the fill slopes. Because you know, a lot of you are aware, we have clay soils up there, which are bright orange or red from a distance. And we try to cover up a lot of that. It actually does two things. It kind of cuts down the erosion potential on the fill slope, but it also hides, it masks that fill slope, so it's not, visually much less of a visual impact. And if you were coming across the central exit, coming toward to this hatchery, just coming from Mount Shasta, you look straight ahead at the hillside behind you and look up to the ridge. That's pretty much where we harvested. And we did the harvest about 5-6 years ago, and you might remember there's a few articles in the paper about it, but it came out looking pretty good. You can see, depending on what angle you're looking at, you can see little segments of our roads, but the whole idea was to create a green belt, and essentially try to look like we weren't there. And I think it came out looking pretty good. And from all reports, that's how it came out. If you don't mind, could I kind of wait till the end otherwise I might stumble. Public speaking isn't my thing. I'm struggling as enough as it is. But a big part of why it came out looking good was we had good people out there. We had real professionals. We had CLT Logging Incorporated. They're one of our main loggers. They're out of Montague. They were very much aware of what we were trying to accomplish. So I think they went out of their way to make it look good. And in terms of how they placed their skid trails and pine trees and things like that. It was they really made it work. Now, of course, one of the main issues we recognize in Rainbow Ridge, and I think this ties in with what the Forest Service has done, and the community forest concept, I guess. This shaded fuel break essentially means we have trees on the, it was all centered on Rainbow Ridge, which is about the part of it that's in our ownership is about 1.3 miles long. I'd say it would vary between 200 and 300 feet wide, even wider than that in places, depending on how narrow the ridge was. And we leave trees, very widely spaced trees, try to create this park-like look, like as Randy showed on some of his pictures. And so it still looks pleasing, and so it's aesthetically pleasing, but it still functions as a defensible space for firefighters to either fight or stop a fire. And we also were able to, fortunately because Roseburg had a cogen facility in Weed, as you're probably aware of, to take the chips. We did what was Randy described as biomassing. That's basically taking all the trees that are like 10 inches and smaller. And those are typically chipped up and hauled and burned for hog fuel to create electricity. Most of our mills have cogen plants that we power our own plants and sell the excess to power companies. But the big thing that kills a lot of the projects, I know there's a lot of fire safe councils in the area that are trying to be proactive and doing thinning projects around their communities. One of the main, in trying to market that material, that chip material, the hauling distance is one of the major things that makes it or breaks it a lot of time. And if you, rule of thumb, if you have to haul your material more than an hour, then it's not going to work. So fortunately, we were able to haul our chips to Roseburg, and that made it work. But we biomassed just on the ridge, and came out looking pretty good. And then a couple of years later, actually John Miller, I don't know if you know him, with CAL FIRE, was successfully put a grant together and was awarded the grant. And they went a step further, and working with us, came out there. And there was, because even after we did all the logging and whatnot, there was still there was a real thick duff layer, which we found out the hard way, that was still out there. A lot of limbs, a lot of brush, still some little trees. So he took the conservation crews, same one, probably the Deadwood camp members, and they created all these hand piles, literally hundreds of these hand piles. Everything that was about 2 or 3 inches in size, they piled up, cut the brush, chopped it all up. Even so we allowed them to cut down some more of these little, small trees, and chunk them up, and they made all these piles. As a company, our in-kind contribution was to burn these piles, which I'm going to show you in these slides. And the plan was they put this paper material on each one of these piles. We're going to do it in the snow, so it's nice and safe. You know, and one thing, trying to save money and get more work done, they decided not to put fire lines, that is a little bare mineral soil fire line around each one of those piles, because it would take a lot of work. Well, the idea is we burn it in the snow, and that wouldn't be an issue. It turned out to be a little bit more of an issue than we figured. And we went out there and burned the piles. There was snow on the ground, and it all went fine. But then after it was all said and done, and the sun came out, it warmed up, snow all melted, and wind picked up, and this material was kind of, what we say, use the term, skunking around in the ground. Ultimately, it ended up doing it accomplished it made it even better, because it got rid of all this duff material. But one night, a few snags caught fire up on the ridge. They weren't going anywhere, but people saw them from town. And I remember I was sitting at home one night watching the football game, trying to have my dinner, and I got a call from the dispatch saying, well, we got 3 engines heading up to Rainbow Ridge. You better get your fanny up there, because a few snags caught fire. We leave snags for wildlife, and we try to leave as many as we can. But in this particular case, leaving it up on the ridge was probably not a good idea, because they burn like Roman candles and puke sparks out, if you can imagine. But we went up there and got our crews up there and told the engine they didn't need to be there and go home. And it turned out to be no big deal. It was inside of our fuel break already. But we spent the next day and a half or so going up there mopping up with a water truck and our own crews. Just, this was late in the year. It was really cold. So moral of the story was put a line around your piles. Anyway, I've got I think I've cut, if I'm not talking too much, pretty much covered what I want to see there. I'm just going to show you a few pictures and talk about what we did. What I don't have is a before picture of what it looked like before we harvested, and I regret that. But I do have some pictures of our fuel break. Okay, just the arrow, correct? Probably me. There you go. Well, this right here emphasizes the visual concerns that we had from our, this is standing around in Rainbow Ridge and looking at Mount Shasta, and that, I think that's the water bottle I planted, that big silver thing there. Some of the things that we incorporated, like this was actually, that's Paul Borger off to the side, because Mount Shasta Herald did a couple of articles about our harvest. We left this screen of trees you see on the edge between the fuel break and the town, basically. I'm trying to visually hide things, I guess, if I could use that term. Another thing I did too, it's outside the fuel break, I felt kind of, this is my project, so I kind of personally walked almost every acre on this job, and if I felt that we were creating too big of a hole in places, I'd marked out more trees. So there again, to keep it green. But this was a screen of trees that we left unharvested on the edge of the ridge. This is what it looked like on top of the ridge after we thinned it out. And again, other places were probably thicker with trees, and we could have actually taken down more of these. The whole idea is to really open it up to make it a defensible space to stop fire or fight fire, a safe place. And that's what it looked like. And a lot of this was done, as you saw one of the machines in Randy's picture, Timco. We do a lot of this mechanically. We cut the machine down, the trees are cut down with a machine, and the whole tree is brought in tree length and manufactured with another machine at the landing. The landing is where you drag these trees in. Am I getting too lengthy here?
You're okay.
Okay. But by doing that, you don't significantly add to the fuel loading that's already there. Bring the whole tree, and of course that's where after we make the logs, there's still what we call tops. These are the last 30 feet of the tree is too small for us to make lumber out of, and so we end up with these huge top piles, we call them, that sometimes are big as a house. And either we got two choices: you're going to burn that material, or hopefully chip it, so it goes to be making energy. And that's what happened up here in Rainbow Ridge. Okay, the next picture. We did, you might recall 3 years ago we had an episode of blowdown all over town. I've been here, like I said, 34 years. I've never seen anything like that in all the time I lived here. But we had it up in the fuel break. There's quite a few trees came down, and we did go up there and salvage that material. We had to get the salvage done before John Miller and his crew could go in there and do their piling, because all the stuff was in the way. But that's the stuff you see in the picture that's knocked down. That was a result of that blowdown. And as you probably knew, around town, it was mostly cedar trees, oaks, and pine, ponderosa pine, probably because of those heavy, long needles, my own theory, that hold snow. We got hit up there too. This is what it looked like after the conservation crews did all the hand piling. They limbed the trees up, gathered up all the stuff on the ground, cut brush, and then you probably can't see it. It's got a kind of that cardboard paper material that's underneath there. You really only need one good spot to get these piles going. The idea was, now the next shot is, here we are burning. That's actually one of our patrolmen, Jake Bushy, out there with what's called a drip torch in his hand. Looks like a giant beer stein. It's got a mixture of oil and diesel gas in it for burning. The diesel is, so it's not too explosive. And you can see there's snow on the ground. It was pretty darn wet and cold, so it felt like pretty safe conditions. And we had to do it when the wind was just right, and that means not blowing into town. And it was hard to get it, all the conditions just right. It was hard to meet that window. But this is one picture was actively burning the piles. Here's another one. I think they're ripping pretty good. Some of these piles were so wet we couldn't even get them going. You wouldn't believe that by looking at these pictures. There again, another aspect of the piles burning. Okay, this is looking across this just, even though it didn't put out a whole lot of smoke. And this is from the, I believe it's from the dock area or the beach area in Lake Siskiyou. I think it's the dock area. And so you can see the smoke's all blowing away from the ridge, which was the whole point. You can see part of one of our little roads up there. This was all harvested, all this whole entire area. Some places on the south facing slope, we didn't have trees, so it made it tough to hide everything. So, but pretty much, I wish I had another picture of what it looked like in the front, but all this, we harvested this whole area. So, like I said, I think it came out looking pretty good. Well, that's about the end of it. Questions?
Future plans.
I think this question was here first.
You had one.
I did. You were talking about retaining slash to hide latex and so forth.
Place it on the fill slope, yes.
Yeah. Did you chip that material and then spread the chips, or did you throw wrenches at it?
No, we took just the debris that we typically create when we build roads. We fall the trees, drag the trees out, but there's still all these limbs, and you have to dispose of the stumps. Of course, we didn't spread the stumps on them. There's still a great deal of brush and limbs, just a lot of what we call slash debris. And typically, like I said, we usually place it along the toe. You can't put it in the fill. It can't be in the fill because that creates an unstable base. We typically put it along the toe of the fill and mash it down. It might be partially buried on the toe. But in this case, we conserved it all and just kind of watered it off wherever we could. And the last thing we did is going through and grabbing the stuff and scattering it with an excavator. And it costs more. It means handling this material twice instead of just once. So, it's a significant added cost, but we did that to try to minimize the visual impact. Is that kind of?
It does.
Okay. Roger?
What impact did the cosmetics have on your total cost?
Well, I never exactly added it all up. Some other things we did. Another big concern, one of the things that we were questioned about, or the CDF or CAL FIRE received questions, was hauling on the North Shore Road. That was a big deal, something we had to coordinate. That was our only way out. We voluntarily agreed to go not haul until after Labor Day, figuring that's a time when kids go back to school, less vacationers and whatnot. And we had to have some form of traffic control. And what we basically had to have a person. We didn't have full-on pilot car type, at least county allowed us not to have to do the pilot car thing, which really would have probably annoyed people even more. It would have slowed down everything. We had, the section of road that was of concern really was along Wagon Creek. As you all know, it's a one lane. There was lots of turnouts, fortunately. We had a person posted up on top by the kids' pond where the sign is. We had signs up warning that we were hauling, log trucks were coming out of there and all that sort of thing. Basically had a person there with CB radio. And you remember on the other end, just past the new bridge they put in, where they reconstructed the curves, there's a big white spot there. So basically, this was all for the loaded log trucks, because the empty trucks were, how you've seen empty log trucks, they're much smaller and they just pull out on a turnout. But the loaded log trucks coming, if they were in that narrow section, we would stop people on the other end, make them wait until the log truck was through. Likewise, if a recreationist was traveling down there, we'd stop the log truck on the other end. So it worked out really good. We had no incidents. There was kind of minimum grumbling, so it worked pretty good. But that's still, having somebody out there every day, all day long, that's a fairly significant cost. So I never added it all up, but it's just difficult to put into a cost, do a cost analysis on something like that, Roger. But leaving the trees in the fill slope and having to work around that, the slash. Trying to think of what else we did. Anyway.
Lily, I think, had a question.
So your talk has been everything you've done up till now. I was wondering what future plans?
Well, we don't have any definitive plans right now.
No more logging?
Well, I wouldn't say that, and I've never said that. We would never log again, but we just don't have any plans right now. I could probably safely say even after the time we quit logging, we probably would consider doing something in there again for another 10, 15 years. Now it's been, typically on a larger scale on our land, we enter watersheds about every 10 years. Now, Rainbow Ridge is kind of unique because it's off by itself, and because, of course, of all the other factors of being so visible to town. But right now, we don't have any plans. Now, if we have if we have salvage up there, if there's anything worth going after, bug trees, which we have these drought years, and typically a lot of times when we coincide with the bug epidemics. You have drought years, trees are put under stress. Trees typically fight off bugs by drowning them out with pitch. And it's particularly when the stands are overstocked, there's too many trees, they're all competing with each other, they're weaker. You just can't produce as much of that pitch to fight off the bugs. The populations of bugs grow and grow, and they just overwhelm the trees. And that like I say, it kind of coincides with drought years, and there's different beetles that attack different trees. You got a mountain pine beetle gets the ponderosa pine, something called Scolitis ventralis. Fern graver beetle kills white fir. We have a lot of that out in the cloud. But anyway, right now we don't have any definitive plans outside of possible salvage, and I don't see that happening in the near future.
I understand back about 1939, a pretty substantial fire burned Rainbow Ridge.
Yeah.
When that reoccurs, which sooner or later it will, how do you think your newly thinned area will survive? Will it mostly be just low ground fire?
It's kind of impossible to say. I don't know exactly when it happened. Obviously, there was a fire up there because before we did build any roads or did any logging, I'd seen these old snags, remnant old snags up there. So obviously, most areas around here have torched off at one time. A lot of it was around the early 1900s, like all that area up there in Shasta Uplands, Monte Shasta, that's all burned. That's why all that brush is there. I mean, you're probably familiar with these areas. Well, theoretically, in a thinning situation like what we've done, I would think it would certainly, there's documented, actually numerous documented examples where a wildfire hit a thinned area and it went from a crown fire to the ground. You know, where fire crews have a much better chance of putting it out. There's been actually several cases that happened. I'm hoping that would be, I don't want to think about a fire being up there, but it's very possible, you know, lightning strikes and or people. We've got the area gated off. We actually put 2 gates up there, and another gate to keep people from going out on the request of the people that live out there in Shasta Brown. They wanted to make sure that, I mean, I do have an issue of motorcycles running up and down the ridge. I can't really stop that because they can get in a variety of places, but we put up that one road we put down on the north side that goes behind the Shasta Brown subdivision. We put a cattle gate on that one. So far, that's worked. Nobody can get out behind there. But your question is, how would it react? What we've done? Well, I certainly could believe it would behave a whole lot better than it would have been if we had never touched it. Just because it was thick stands. Those small trees that are in the understory are typically called ladder fuels that allow the fires to jump from the ground to the crowns. And we couldn't do it everywhere because some of the ground was just too steep or too visible to town, but we tried to do as much as we could. But I believe it would certainly offer a much more, strategic or more advantageous place to fight fire. Now, sometimes when you get these raging wildfires that are really wind-driven, there's really nothing that can stop something like that. It really doesn't matter what is in the path. If you get enough,
I think we have one question up here, and then why don't we
Yeah.
take a break and we can answer more questions after all of this.
Do you ever do clear cutting?
Yes, we do. We do it on our higher site ground. We typically don't call, the law allows us to, we leave wildlife retention areas, about 1 for every 5 acres. We leave these groups of trees out there about 60, 70 feet across, sometimes bigger, sometimes much bigger. We leave those out there to provide structure. Like I say, 1 for about every 5 acres. And because we do that, we're never going to harvest those trees. We're basically dedicating them and of course we're going to we go in, after we're done harvesting, we soon thereafter go in, we prepare the ground and plant it. Sometimes that very fall or the following spring. We plant with a mix of species, white fir, pine, sometimes Doug fir, even red fir at higher elevations. Part of the reason those wildlife nooks provide structure for the critters. I've seen raptors use them, I've seen goshawks use them, deer bed in them, but they also break it up visually. They make it look nicer. And we try to leave individual trees scattered around too. And because we do that, we call them alternatives. An alternative prescription that's allowed by law, but you have to identify what harvest method is closest to. It's obviously most closely resembles a clear cut. Like I say, I don't know exactly what percentage we do on our land overall. But at least from a forest management standpoint, standpoint. We obviously, in our management, we have to protect all the other resource values out there. You know, fisheries, wildlife, watersheds. But it is the most, for us, it is the most efficient way of growing trees. We are mandated by law. We are supposed to be maximizing our growth production off our land. So that's the sense that's tree farming. But what else can I thought that would come up with the issue about clear cutting. But what else can I say about that? We have quite an investment when we do it. We put anywhere from $300 to $500 per acre in terms of dealing with the site prep afterward, planting the trees. Usually we plant more trees than we need, so we can go in after 10, 15 years later, we go in and thin them out to keep the best individuals and leave the other ones. Controlling the brush. It's fairly expensive. So it's a long-term investment.
What is the cycle time between?
Well, it depends on when we go back in again on the plantation we've created. 50, we could go in probably in 30 years and do a commercial thinning. But ultimately, to harvest a tree, 50 years, you know, on good ground. So.
And there'll be time for more questions for Wheeler afterwards or for any of the presenters, but why don't we move on to the U.S. Forest Service. Is Jim back there? You want the lights turned down a little
Yes,
bit?
but he's in the front if we could.
Let's see if we can get that.
Good evening, everyone. Other way. There we go. Thanks. Much better. My name is Nisha Van Hees. I'm the, like Kara said, I'm the Timber Stand Improvement Program Manager for the district. And what that means is I do a lot of stand tending in silviculture. I take care of plantations after they are certified reforested on up to about age 70 or 80, which is what we call that rotation. So that age range of plantations, my department takes care of. We do a lot of pre-commercial thinning, hazardous fuels reduction, release work, which means cutting unwanted and undesirable vegetation, pruning, wildlife treatments. It's a wide-ranging types of treatments that we do. Today, of course, I'm here to talk about the Rainbow Ridge project, and was asked to talk about what we've been doing up there. So I'll just get right into that and say thank you for coming. As you can see, I've already mentioned we work, fuels and silviculture work together in an integrated manner to try to make the most of, get the biggest bang for our buck. We try to do our best to stay at a high integrity of how we spend taxpayer dollars and to meet our forest plan and direction. I'll scoot this over just a skosh. Don't worry about this tipping over. So what I have here for you is an overview of, oopsie, wrong computer. Where am I going here, Karen?
Just press the next arrow.
Thank you. Okay. I have here for everybody's viewing pleasure, we have an overview of the area. You can see Mount Shasta City over here with the fancy little arrow pointing towards that. Over to the west, in the green, this fancy green color, we have our layer that is our plantation layer and our fuel break layer. Kind of show you what we in Forest Service have recently covered in our NEPA planning process to treat in this particular area. We've got approximately 100 acres of fuel break and 900 acres of plantations in this general vicinity that we want to treat. And we just got done with the planning process, which was quite time consuming and took us 4 years to get through. So we were very excited. This season was our first year to actually do some treatment out there on the ground. And what we chose to do is we treated these plantations here just off of the Morgan Meadows Road, and then as you come on up around the ridge top here, we treated all of these mechanically, or they are being treated currently. And then what you see right here along this long skinny piece is the Rainbow Ridge, and we treated this portion approximately right where the light is to the north so far. From this other green blob or polygon you see here, it was also what we call the southern portion of the Rainbow Ridge area that was treated under a different planning document back in 2008. And I'm going to just talk mostly today about the treatments we've done on the ridge itself. But just to continue with the overview, the pink purpley color, those are roads, just for your information. The blue lines are Forest Service boundary with other land ownerships. It could be SPI, it could be private land. So, for example, here to the west or to your left is Forest Service managed lands. This little square is Forest Service as well. Out here is all private land in this area. What else? Okay, so the red lines that you see there, those are old historic fire boundary lines that were in this area. You'll notice up here there was a fire approximately 1,000 acres. I've got some data here that I can share with you. This one up here was about 1,000 acres. It was in 1924. There was one in 1931 that was about 100 acres right over here, which is now where town is. We have a great big one that was mentioned earlier tonight in 1939 that was about 22,000 acres, and that's what this boundary is right here that you see, and it kind of goes off the screen. I guess, and it goes on and on. There were about 10 fires in this general area that you're looking at in the since 1900, and they ranged anywhere from about 50 to 22,000 acres. The fire return interval in this area is about 5 to 15 years, which is high. That's due to the high amount of vegetation that we have in the area. The high vegetation isn't ideal. We would like it to be less, more natural state, so that we would have a lot longer fire return interval that we do not have. But we're not necessarily talking about that today. Okay, so this screen, and I did it again. This one is just an overview of what was treated in 2008, excuse me. This little corner right here is where the Forest Service property and the Rainbow Ridge meets up with SPI land. Okay, and there's a road that runs right along the whole top of this ridge, and we're going to get to go see some of that for those of us that are going on Saturday. We treated this piece in 2008, and this piece we just finished treating about a month ago. The plan here was to create a defensible buffer and to treat plantations, and the work was completed, this portion of the work was completed in the southern area by hand by Forest Service crews in 2008. It's very labor intensive. The basic prescription for the entire fuel break area, or what we do, is we're cutting all trees under 10 inches diameter at 4.5 feet above the ground. And we were pruning the trees up about 12 feet. We left as many healthy trees as possible in order to create a shaded fuel break. So what we started with was a couple of different aggregates, where one aggregate was a brush field, and then the other areas were timber. What you're looking at here on the screen in the southern end is mostly timbered lands. I'll show you some brush field areas before shots as well here in a little bit. The shaded fuel break was, this is just over 1 mile in length, just to give you a little bit of a perspective right here from this spot to this spot. The whole thing's just over 2 miles total. The width of the treatment from the edge of the Jeep Trail is about 150 feet either side. With hand treatment, we can go ahead and treat clear out to that 150-foot mark. With mechanical treatment that we've done recently, we stop at the break of the slope with the machines because we don't want them treating on the very steep slopes. Okay, this is just kind of a contract map that I threw in here to show you what was on contract this year, what's currently being treated. Over here you'll see the fuel break that was completed, as mentioned before. This is kind of a before shot of pre-treated fuels. This shot is not the fuel break. I couldn't locate my before pictures, but it's pretty close. So, you know, what you've got in most of this, the timbered, brushy areas out there is impenetrable brush and overdense stands. We are trying to create, you know, that defensible space that so many of the other gentlemen have spoken about as well. Here is an after shot of what we had. So basically, this is what you had beforehand. And after the hand treatment in 2008, this is what we have now, 4 years post-treatment. You can't really see it, but right there is Black Butte. So if you're on Black Butte and looking this way, you can see it. Here's another post-treatment view of this. Get my notes out. Some technical difficulties. And that's the southern end of the fuel break there. Okay, so here's an overview of the brush fields that I was talking about. This photo was taken, it's a Google Earth photo that was taken this year before our treatment. What you see here, this light colored, okay, this is the ridge road. This right here is 8-foot high brush, okay, that you can't walk through unless you just really, really, really try. Just right here off of the edge of this photo is where the northern road heads off to the west. Remember the contract map I showed you, and there's plantations all out in here. You can kind of see some of the terracing from the plantations here. See those little ridges? And we're treating those as well, so we'll get an added benefit from fuel reduction with that. Here's an after treatment of that very same shot. This was taken last week. What we have now is we've left just about all the conifers. The only ones we removed in this brush field area, because remember we're striving for a shaded fuel break eventually, but we're working with what we have currently. So we left all the healthy conifers that we could and cut all the brush, and this width here is approximately 90 to 100 feet in here. We couldn't make our entire 150 foot wide either side yet. So, you know, there's potential if there's funding that we might continue on. A year or so from now, this will be full of brush again and 2 to 4 feet high. You can see this from town, by the way. You can see it from the freeway. If you look up, please pull over first. Here's a shot of one of the types of machines that we use in our contracts. This is a Cabelco, obviously. It's got a Fecon type head or a drum style head on it. You can see the operator will raise this up, and then this just spins and chews up the vegetation. And we get that result that you saw here on the ground, which this is, you know, the smallest or the largest pieces of debris are a foot long or so. We get a very good end result with it. Here's another type of machine. It's a Cat 315C with a AFE head on it. It's kind of a slash buster type head or a rotary disc type head, and it's a similar kind of machine. It just spins in a disc type style at about 1700 RPMs rather than the Vicon drum style head. So those are two different tools I thought I'd share with you. This is a different area altogether, but it's a really good shot to show you what our end results are. Here's another view from the top of the ridge looking toward Black Butte, just to kind of show a little bit of a perspective of how close we are to town. This is on down the ridge looking back. If you, right here is the brush field, and then I walked up the ridge, down the ridge road, and back up to the, through the saddle, and to give you kind of a perspective. The photo's not real great, but I think you can get the idea that we've got a definite break in vegetation there so that we can potentially hold a fire from this point if we need to, when we need to. Here's another shot. This one is looking, if you look off to your left, the eddies are up here, and this is the ridge road again. There's plantations down in there that you can see some of our plantations that we plan on treating. Bless you. Here's another shot. This one is, the aspect here is facing east toward town, just to kind of show you what we're leaving out there. This is the 2008 work that was completed where we don't have shade all day long. So we're getting regrowth here. This chinkapin is 3.5 to 4 feet high again already. The whole thing isn't quite ready to treat, but this is what you can expect it to look like where I just showed you, that it was treated in probably about 2 to 3 years where I just showed you. Here is in the area as we kept progressing down into the timber from the brush field where we were receiving shade most of the day, and it just kind of shows you the debris on the ground. We've changed the continuity of fuels, and we expect very little vegetation regrowth. Here's another shot of that heading south on the ridge toward SPI land. There's that road. And in summary, just to share a couple of facts with you, talking about surface fuel loading and tree height, ground density, those are some terms that we use to express what we're trying to do out there and changing that fuel structure. Unless we burn it, the fuel's really still there, so we're just really rearranging it, right? So this is just sharing with you that the surface fuel is reduced from 15 to 20 tons per acre there on the ridge to about 6 to 8 tons per acre in a different arrangement of fuels. And so therefore, they're on the ground now, they can break up easier. The snowpack will help them degrade to where the tons per acre reduces, continue a little bit more. However, the trees are growing and creating more fuel all the time. So, crown bulk density is reduced from 6 to 800 stems per acre to a more desired 120 stems per acre. So, or trees per acre is another way to look at that. And probability of fire containment increased from 0 to 75%. There's a lot more that could be said. I know it's getting late. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
On those, when you're doing brushing, is that being allowed, then, did I take it, you were saying that was going to be, that's mulched on site, so it's, providing nutrients back to the soil?
Yeah, that's correct. It does, yes.
And that's like a certain percentage of, and you're not going off the most hill slopes that are steeper, that brush is maintained as is normal.
Oh, yes, it stays right there. We're not, we don't drag it anywhere or put it.
Well, I mean,
in
like,
mulch.
if there's just certain parameter or focus area that's actually worked, I mean, on the steeper slopes, like, it's.
Correct, with the machinery, that's correct,
The
yes.
native brushes.
By hand, we may do more treatments on the steeper slopes, yes.
Because I know for a while perspective that the brush species do, and for pollinators and whatnot, they are very crucial in the ecological sense, being very productive for the environmental ecology of the site.
Yes?
Thank you.
Is the Forest Service considered incorporating prescribed burns to minimize some of that fuel load that's really still left there, and also to manage some of that brush that comes back, and to incorporate something that's part of our ecosystem out here?
That's a really good question. At this time, no, we're not. The complexity of that in our planning, and there's a lot that goes on with that. Just to get through with the planning of doing a big prescribed burn in this area, it isn't that we wouldn't want to do that. It's a huge planning effort to do it. In plantations, we would not do a prescribed burning in this age of a plantation. We've got a large investment in there, and if we brought fire into those young stands, they wouldn't make it.
But at the ridge top.
On the ridge top, we have done some pile burning in the south end of that, but the state that we've left that in, where it showed you where it was mechanically treated, no, we wouldn't go back anywhere from that, not now.
I was wondering if the Forest Service has plans to plant in any trees in the brush field, because you're talking about shaded field,
Right.
and it looks like, you say there's no shade, so the brush goes back.
True, the brush will come back. We do not have plans to plant trees out there. It's not to say that we wouldn't, and that might be an interesting collaboration effort there. Some tree planting efforts could go on, but at this point in time, we don't plan on it. I would expect to see some reseeding in there. Not a lot. It's going to be interesting to see what goes on. The site is just like any site. It's going to come. The plants and trees are going to get in there, and whoever gets in there first wins. Well, the brush is already there. We haven't killed it. We've set it back. So. Where we do find seedlings and saplings, we leave them on purpose so that they can stay. Anybody else?
I'd just like to say, I think the work you're doing is extremely important and very beneficial for everybody in the community.
Thank you. It's good to have support. And with that, I would share one other thing, in that we would really appreciate public support and input in our planning processes. When we go out and you see the ads in the paper that we're planning a project or something, we really would like your input and support for these types of projects. It's really important to how we manage public lands. Thank you.
How long of a return interval are you going to plan on for retreatment?
Well, depending on cost, that's a good question.
Right.
It always depends on cost, okay? However, I currently plan on going in there every 3 to 5 years and treating this brush area especially. Now the area that's already shaded, Like I showed you the pictures of the 4-year-old treatment, it really doesn't need it yet. I would expect it to all be retreated in about 3 to 5 years from now. And then we would continue looking at it and going back in as it's cost effective.
So that retreatment be much more efficient than it was this last time?
Yes, yes, it certainly would. That's a good question, and cost effective too.
Yeah.
Now, access is a big problem out there. I think one of the other gentlemen mentioned that already. The roads are not in great shape. It's a long drive. It's an hour plus out there on big bumpy roads, and we pay for that. You know, those big machines, they're not easy to get in there. They have to walk very slowly.
I mean, years ago, I haven't done it recently, but I've ridden my bicycle along that bridge.
Did you?
You go up that, basically the whole, loop up there. It's a beautiful trail.
It is
It'd
beautiful.
really be a great recreation trail. It kind of, you pitch that, it gives you one reason to keep it open and accessible.
Yeah. Yeah, it is beautiful up there. Great views.
I'm just wondering, you kind of referring to mostly as plantations, did you have historical data about the native, the natural patterns that were in that area before, what I would guess was substantial harvest of old growth, the forests that as were, and then subsequent plantings, meaning recently I was in a plantation over by McLeod. It seemed like mostly Napa, which I was surprised to see being a prevalent tree if they were planted by humans. But what I'm saying is, do you have any historical references to like red fir sites or other special, forest types that, before they were initially harvested?
You're talking about the plantations up here specifically?
Yeah, I guess in that way, because I would take it they've already been logged years ago, and then the conversion was either through planting of stock trees or, just natural restocking. So what I'm saying is, if there were any special resource areas with regards to certain forest types, different red fir, this or that.
Well, yeah, we know what
Large
was
stands.
there
Okay.
before and what the suitability of the land is and what should be there naturally, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
What was there, we do. We have that data and we use that data in our planning processes. Yes, absolutely.
So that was pretty well documented.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to the next one then. I'll try to be quick since we are getting a little late. Before I start with this though, I did want to echo something that Nisha had mentioned. As it has been in our flyers, we are planning to have a field tour of each one of these spots that have been presented on today. I would ask anyone interested in that to please sign up. We need to do this for 2 reasons. First of all, particularly the Forest Service part is very difficult to get through, so we need special vehicles for it. They need to be 4-wheel drive and with a high clearance. So we need to make sure that we have enough of those vehicles to get everyone there. The second reason is if we don't have enough interest, then we won't have the tour. So we do want to know if there is interest and to be able to plan that. Yeah.
When is that tour?
That's Saturday.
This Saturday?
We'll be beginning at 10 o'clock. And we'll be starting at the Siskiyou Lake North Shore boat launch. Okay, I am going to speak a little bit on a private residential landowner's experience in forest stewardship. The family we're looking at are the Jessups. They own about 105 acres of forest and meadow land along Rainbow Ridge. It's pretty smack dab in the center of the ridge in its entirety, so it's further north than Sierra Pacific and County lands and adjacent to some Forest Service lands. This area was initially purchased in 1963, and in 1965 you can actually see an old railroad station they brought in and they transformed it into their family compound. It's a really well-loved property by the family. All the structures were either built or restored in the railroad station's case by the patriarch of the family, the late Richard Jessup. And it's still being used by the extended family and beyond to several generations. Wildlife is very well adored on this property. They have many different animals: foxes, bears, owls, woodpeckers. They have a feral donkey that was at one point in time somebody's pet and just went off on its own and enjoys the land as he does. And it's a place where their large extended family can meet up and have all several tens of people there at the same time, 35 people, 40 people at any one time. So what I'm trying to express is, they love this land. They're not there to make a profit out of any sort of forest management. They want to make sure that this is land that can be passed down from generation to generation, and the values they have come to respect and adore be passed down as well. This is just a quick view of the property. You can see the vast majority of it is forest land, but there is a little bit of meadowland. It's a mature, even-age forest, which basically means all the trees are about the same age. Likely, the RPF who's in charge of this suggested that it may be largely regeneration from the Deer Creek fire, which was 38-39, and I have the wrong date there. So this is all getting older, but at the same time, it's still only maybe it's 50 years old, but they're all the same age. It's largely Doug fir, but there's also some pines and cedar, and it's got a very high basal area, which was, as described before, that cookie-cutter stump area in comparison to the spaces in between. Prior to the development of a non-industrial timber management plan, the NTMP, really all that was done on the property was just what the family could do. So they might take down some smaller trees, clear some brush, but they couldn't do some of the more heavy-duty things. In order to take care of the land, in order to create a plan that could last generations, the parents, the Jessup parents, Richard Jessup and his wife, decided that they wanted to create an NTMP. So what is an NTMP? We heard from the county that there is one on the county land surrounding Lake Siskiyou. Plenty of private landowners have an NTMP. The definition is NTMP allows for smaller, non-industrial private forest timberland owners to prepare a long-term management plan that reduces regulatory time and expense by providing an alternative to filing individual timber harvest plans. In exchange, landowners agree to manage their forests through uneven age management and long-term sustained yield. So we can already see uneven age management, something that the forest was not. So they're in the process of turning their even age forest into uneven age. And then they had the local weed-based Jefferson Resources to develop this plan, and that is currently their RPF. The benefits is that this can ensure consistency over a long time. So even as land passes from elder generation to younger generation, gets inherited, that plan is still in place. So those values that the parents had can be passed down to the children and their children and so on. It can also be useful in the case where a couple of years ago where a lot of that blowdown around town occurred. For the Jessups, it was really easy to go in and salvage some of those materials within their forest without necessarily having to go through some of the more time-consuming exemptions that without an NTMP they might have to. Some of the challenges are that an NTMP has a lot of front-end costs. In order to get it completed, you're looking at spending $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to get it developed, and this is because you need to do a lot of the pre-surveys, the inventories, and then do the plan itself. But after that, it's easier to actually go in and do treatment subsequently. The other issue is that it requires uneven age management, and sustainable yield, which is okay depending on your individual objectives. But this means that we're looking at sustainable forestry, which is a little bit different from restoration forestry, if I can just explain that very quickly. Sustainable forestry is where you're trying to get a sustained yield out of the forest. So you're growing trees and you're taking out other trees so that you can continue growing the same amount of trees. Restoration style forestry is, it depends on where you're at, but what you're looking to do is actually return the forest to historic conditions, which might not mean that you're taking out trees, bigger trees, to let little trees come in. You're not necessarily looking at ensuring that you're going to be taking out an average amount of timber every time you go in. So that's fine, different landowners have different objectives, but there's not really any room for people who do want to have restoration style forestry. So the actual treatments that have occurred so far under the NTMP, in 2007 was the initial entry. It was light treatment, including the removal of diseased, dying trees, infested trees. Ultimately, they determined what trees to keep and what trees to take out based on their health. So if you have two trees nearby each other and one of them had heart rot or mistletoe, the one with the heart rot or mistletoe would be taken out. However, if all trees were the same, they would be more likely to take out cedar, because at that point in time, the cost of cedar was higher, so they could actually recoup some of the costs of doing treatment to begin with. Cedar is also, it's a shade-tolerant and tree that regenerates pretty easily, so they weren't exactly worried about eradicating cedar on their property. They didn't do too much snag retention around the house in order to keep areas around the house safer, but they did keep snags on other parts of the property. This is 105 acres, so there were plenty of areas where they could keep dead or dying trees for wildlife purposes without worrying about how that's going to affect the actual buildings. They also had to construct a road to reach some of the more inaccessible areas of the property. They were looking at increasing spaces between crowns so that if there is a crown fire, you wouldn't see fire going from the tops of trees to other tops of trees, which are notoriously difficult to fight in a fire. And then they added a fuel break along their little part of the ridge, which is in the northern part. I guess the ridge is right up here. They added a fuel break along there. And then another treatment occurred in 2009, serendipitously after the big storm where there was a lot of wind throw. This was really just to clean up the damage that had occurred as a result of the storm. It's very minimally invasive. They had 3 people in there with chainsaws, as opposed to the machinery that they had brought in for the initial entry. They had a very light touch, and they were pretty generous with trees that they thought might survive. They kept. So trees that had 20 to 30% crown loss were retained further away from the house because they had a reasonable estimation that those trees would survive. Closer to the house, they were less generous because they didn't want to see more trees potentially falling on those buildings. And actually, during the storm, there was a victim. This guest house, which was built by Richard Jessup, ended up getting smashed by a couple trees during the storm. The roof had to be repaired. So this is one of the challenges with NTMP activities on the Jessup property. Wind throw occurs when you have a lot of densely packed trees and you take out some of those trees that are remaining aren't used to standing up to some of the high winds that maybe a tree that had grown up individually would have been able to survive through. So that was a bit of an issue. As it turns out, though, the places that they treated didn't really suffer any excess wind throw than the places that they did treat, that they didn't treat. So they're thinking that probably that wasn't really as much of a big deal. It was just a big storm in 2009 that would have thrown down trees regardless. Obviously, there's concerns about road construction in order to get in and do treatment, and it's somewhat difficult to be completely unobtrusive because you do have to bring in some machinery, but with the coordination of their RPF, the Jessups and their RPF made sure that as much as possible they reduced big machinery. So they brought in a chipper rather than some of the larger machines that are out there. One of the biggest, most important things about the way the Jessups treat their property, though, is they don't just give it to their RPF to do all the work. This is very much a family affair. This is the family wanting to take care of their property. Once a year, they have an event where the family gathers to work on forestry in their property. It's usually about 35 people, and it ranges from little children to, as Katie Jessup was saying, when she was younger, her grandmother, who was 95 at the time, would be working on trail work. So they find jobs for every single one of the people in their families. They work on removing slash, they manage the roads, clear trails, and remove invasive plants from some of the disturbed road and landing sites. During the winter, smaller groups of individual family members will come together and burn those slash piles, although they also invite other family and friends to come in and take some of that slash for firewood. This really helps keep their cleanup costs down. Rather than have someone professionally come in and burn these piles or take the slash, they're keeping their costs down. So some of the things that Katie Jessup suggested were useful and challenging with regards to forest stewardship. When the idea of doing treatment first came about in their family, there was some resistance. The younger generations weren't really sure what the impact of treatment was going to be, particularly the construction of the road. They came to know the forest that they grew up in, and they were initially resistant to that sort of change. Although at this point, now that treatment has occurred, the family is generally pleased with what's happened. Very important, there's no such thing as just treating it once and being done. Management is a lifelong process. They have to keep coming back, whether it be through their family events or through further entries in the future. It's really useful for her to be a point of contact. A lot of her family doesn't live in this area, but because Katie Jessup lives in this area, she can be that point of contact with their RPF and keep up to date on what's going on with the property. She emphasized that having a registered professional forester that understands your goals and objectives is extremely important. You really have to develop a relationship. And if you do, then you're going to be a lot more happy with the treatment. One of the biggest challenges for everybody, of course, is getting some money back from some of the treatment activities that can help pay for the cost of doing them to begin with. But the property is mostly conifers. There's some hardwood, some black oak, but in general, it's all low value. So they're not able to actually sell enough of the merchantable timber that might come out to cover the entire costs of the treatment to begin with. And then she suggested that there is potential collaboration with neighbors that she would love to see go through, particularly with a road that goes through her property and goes through the property of some neighbors. It would be a really good opportunity for collaboration, she suggested, if together they maintain that road so that you could have a point of egress should there be a fire. Currently the road is impassable. At one point in time it was passable, but no longer. So she looks forward to the possibility of working with her neighbors, as I hope many people in River Ridge did. This is just an example of some pre-treatment plots. These are plots that have not been taken care of yet. The lower one actually is Katie Jessup, the landowner, well, one of the many landowners. And then on the upper left is where you have a lot of that wind throw, in addition to the fact that it hasn't been thinned anyway. So this is what it basically looked like all over the property beforehand. This is what it looked like afterwards. The lower picture is of the fuel break along the ridge, and the upper picture is just another part of her property nearby the house, actually. So you can see it's a lot nicer, it's a lot clearer, and then you see a lot less of those ladder fuels that could bring a fire from the ground to the top. But stewardship is ongoing, as I said. The upper picture, we see a lot of regeneration. This happens very quickly, particularly in the areas that get a lot of sun. A lot of the cedars just popping up, the pines just popping up. And then in the lower picture, you see a place that has been treated, but the slash hasn't been taken care of. So this is a job for the family event that they just haven't gotten to yet. But this is, again, ongoing. Did you have a question? That's it for this presentation. Katie Jessup would be happy to get any questions directly from you if you have any. Her contact information is up here. We really thank Katie Jessup and her family for allowing us onto her property to talk about what she's been through. And again, the tour will feature her property. It's the last point we'll be going to for those who are interested. Any questions? Any questions for other people? Oh, I'm sorry.
I have a question. Within the concepts of some of the global warming and other carbon dioxide buildup, I know that there's a Pacific Forest Trust that's starting to look at carbon credits for maintaining sustainable older growth forests and mature, what some would term mature forests. Is values for those types of, older, mature stands coming up in the future, do you feel? I mean, it's already partly.
Well, and I think that question goes back to the sustainable forestry versus restoration forestry, because under this sort of NTMP, I don't think something like that would be possible, because you're trying to keep that uneven aged forest, where you have some smaller trees, some middle-sized trees, some bigger trees. You're not necessarily emphasizing that older growth and only that older growth. But, sorry, Kathleen.
Just to add to that, if it is seen that a forest does hold a certain amount of carbon, it's a really complex conversation, but it is possible under an NTMP, but it's